And good morning, and welcome to OpenLine Online, Sunday, June 30th. And it's good to be here again for our listening audience. We are going to jump right in. We have a lot to discuss here. And let's introduce our panel. I'm going to start closest to me this time. Sister journalist.
Thank you, Fatim.
Nitha Khan, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, guys.
Killer
Good to be
Khan.
with you.
Welcome back for traveling
you?
is Bobby Charles.
Good to be back, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Bobby was in
Got
the
a
south
little
of France
tan.
hanging out with the Obamas.
Almost.
Came close. We missed each other by half a day.
Half a day, huh?
Second time that's happened to me. A few years ago, we went on vacation to Bali, and the day.
Such a show off.
No, I'm not. Just telling
I'm
the
just
facts.
kidding.
Just the facts. Anyway, just the.
Oh, your mic's not working.
Mic's not working, huh?
Hey, always a little.
All right, it was working before. Anyway, we just missed him second time. People don't need to know the details of it, so.
When you connect with the Obamas, they're gonna have you be their spokesperson.
No, I doubt that. All it tells me is that all it means is when, you know, me and my family, we decide to go on vacation, it seems to be the same week that they like to go on vacation. So what a coincidence twice, though.
Sounds
Just missed
good.
him.
Bobby's a good guy. That's why I say that. I tell you. Next, we have the History Brothers there. We have Achille Buchanan. Good morning,
Good morning,
my
brother. Sorry I wasn't here last week,
That's
but
all
I'm
right,
here
brother.
today. How's everyone?
Good.
Good.
Good. And we have Brother Protest there.
Channeling Cornell.
I take it.
Yes, Brother Larry Ham. Good morning, my brother.
Good morning.
And we have Attorney Bob Pickett over there.
Yes,
He's
indeed.
a little chilly today, huh, Bob?
A little chilly, and
Actually, it is.
good.
What?
Yeah, got
Good
that
morning.
I think
Well,
it's hot.
studios are usually cool.
I don't mind it because it's
got
been
that
so hot.
Frederick Douglass look over there.
Yeah.
And Jamie Harris will be joining us from the New York Amsterdam News in a few minutes.
We got some viewers out there. So Pat Johnson, Audie Autumn, Michael Dwyer, Donna Harris, A. Musa Ahmad, all good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Wished us good morning. And I think
Free zone.
I think we've stalled enough for
What's up,
Jamie to
brother?
join us. So
Jamie's grand entrance.
Free zone.
He has his Omega Sci-Fi. I'm not going to imitate. I'm not an Omega man.
Give
so
me a
I-
mic.
I'm
Give
not-
me a mic. I'm ready.
I'm not going to have anybody.
Oh, Lord.
I'm not going to have the Q dogs come looking for me,
I'm here
coming down with their atomic dog.
I'm here specifically for Miss Khan after our text exchanges this week.
Oh, I got it.
yeah.
Miss Khan. We gonna,
No, that's
See,
right.
I didn't respond.
She didn't respond.
I didn't
That's why
respond.
I'm
I was
after
like,
you
I'm
because
gonna
you
save
did not
it for the
respond.
show.
That's right.
Let's kick this off a little bit here. I'm throwing it to Sister Nitha Khan. Today is the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, and the Stonewall uprising took place in June of 1969. That was a series of spontaneous, violent demonstrations by members of the gay, LGBTQ plus community in the Greenwich Village section of New York City. Down in the village area where we are broadcasting a few blocks from Stonewall. Give our audience a little update about Stonewall and today's events.
You know, and it's interesting because there's already so many cops. I don't know if you guys noticed, but everywhere, all in this area in the village and all up and down the West Side Highway, delegating traffic because it is the 50th anniversary. So they're expecting, I think, something close to 3 million people coming from all over the world, and they've been having celebrations all weekend long. On Friday, I was actually sitting outside of this coffee shop here in the village, and it was funny because there were all these events already that began, and I think de Blasio spoke, and apparently Lady Gaga performed, and I missed that, but I didn't even realize. But anyway, I was sitting in this coffee shop outside, and this older woman came and sat down next to me, really great, this like older white lady, and we had this random conversation, and she told me that she's been living here for decades and decades in the village, and she was there the the night that this happened, and she saw so much of the violence and what went on. And it's pretty remarkable when you think, I believe it was somebody threw a bottle in resistance to the cops' raiding, and that's what started it all. And to see the trajectory from that to, you know, the LGBTQ community fighting for their rights and being here. But then it's also troubling at the same time because you have this administration and you have an environment that's been created where hate crimes are on the rise for that community as well. So it's like hate crimes are on the rise for people of color, for religious communities, and for the LGBTQ community. So so I know that's why people are also mobilized to come out and fight for their rights and say we're not going anywhere. So in a show of solidarity, I went around and took some pictures and looked, and there were a lot of people who are already here on Friday and Saturday, and today, of course, the parade down Fifth Ave, and then there's a bunch of other events going on too. So it's going to be a lot happening in the city. So if you're driving around, definitely don't drive in the village.
Yeah, what struck me was that it over the years, it has gained so much momentum and a lot more acceptance in mainstream than it has before, that it is actually a global pride. So it's global pride, and you'll find similar events taking place in the UK, other parts of Europe. But there's still places around the world where being gay, lesbian is against the law. And I do find it not ironic, but, you know, it's just the life that we live in, right? That our president is in the demilitarized zone, North Korea, meeting with Kim Jong, who is against homosexuality, right? They throw people in jail in North Korea.
In North Carolina, too.
Carolina's
Freudian
another issue,
slip.
right? In North Korea. And a report came out recently, and we know one of the things that has been a problem in the gay community is HIV. North Korea has one of the highest now reported cases of HIV in that community out there. And again, so to look at somebody who you're going to idolize and call your friend, who is not accepting of the human beings and the choices they make in their life, I just think it's just par for the course with this administration. The other thing that struck me, and I know we've talked in previous shows about reparations. So the New York Commissioner, James O'Neill, came out recently and apologized for the police behavior that caused that issue, right? So, you know, when you read the accounts of what was going on at Stonewall, it was sort of peaceful until the police instigated it, right? So the police were the instigators. So for the police commissioner now to apologize for it, I commend him for that. But then I look at that in the context of reparations, as we've talked about. We still have not had an apology for slavery.
Well, you know what's great? Just one quick thing. I think the police chief at the time, that was at the time 50 years ago, he made some sort of statement saying, and I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, if I helped their movement, then I'm glad that I had these raids happen. And I was like, that's a very odd statement to make, and I don't know if it was a genuine.
But that was the climate back then.
Yeah, but he made this statement later.
And it's still the
like
climate today. I mean, gay people are still being victimized. I mean, it's important, of course, always to understand how far we've come, and we have come a long way. In my lifetime, I can remember growing up,
even in my lifetime,
and how if you were considered, we use the word gay now, but there were less complimentary terms that were used back then. You would be bullied. You would be beaten up. You would be ridiculed, and on and on and on. So some of that has calmed down. But as Nither pointed out, gay people are still being discriminated against, and in this Trump era, there has been an increase in attacks on gay people. But at the same time, in that bastion of feudalism and torture, Saudi Arabia, gay people are being beheaded. In the 21st century. People's heads are being cut off because they're gay. And lastly, I just want to say, during this period, it's important to remember people in our history who were gay and who played significant roles, but only now are they being recognized, like Bayard Rustin, like James Baldwin, and
like
on and
Audre
on.
Lorde.
That's a
Yeah,
good
yeah.
point.
You talk about Saudi Arabia. You had again the G20 this week, and who's front and center, shaking hands and
Absolutely.
laughing?
Of course.
Trump
Right in the
and
middle.
MBS,
Right in the middle.
And so again, a regime who is oppressive to human beings' rights,
Well,
and they're best friends.
Trump's best friends are, I was just going to say, authoritarians. So you had Putin, MBS, and then Un. All three of them.
Let me just add.
I want to go back to what a few of us said. We shouldn't mischaracterize what Stonewall was. First of all, it was not a spontaneous uprising. The police had harassed and beaten and terrorized many of the gay brothers and sisters who frequented the Stonewall bar for years. The police would come and shake down the owners of the Stonewall Inn.
And that was one of the few places that they could go.
Exactly, and to make the connection between the gay liberation movement and the black civil rights movement and the black liberation movement, there were black and brown transvestites who said, enough is enough. We're not taking this anymore. And in high heels and in dresses, they went toe-to-toe with police officers in the street, and they whooped that butt. And that started the prairie fire throughout the world about gay oppression. But let's not get it twisted. It was through intense, continued oppression by the police, shaking down these gay men and, thinking that they were punks because they were in dresses. No, they whooped that butt.
Exactly. They really did. And let me just say welcome back to my brother Bobby, enjoying his birthday with the wonderful family in the south of
Happy
France.
belated.
Thank you.
And that wasn't a Freudian slip when he said North Carolina. 2016, remember, the NBA canceled the All-Star game
Very good point.
because in North Carolina, they had a bill which disallowed people who were transgender from using the bathroom for which they identified with. So the NBA said, no, we're canceling the game, which cost the city a lot of money. And so the NBA has been the league far more than any other league that's been on the forefront and progressive when it comes to dealing with it. Remember, you had coaches who, and some who came out and who were openly gay and received full support from the NBA, David Stern previously, and then Adam Silver, the commissioner.
And I just want to.
We also had this week a little spat between the women's soccer team, the captain Megan Rapinoe,
The star.
the star of it, and she just said, "F no, I'm not going to the White House," and just
F Trump.
and just some of the negative
preempted the
comments.
invitation.
Well, just
Yes.
some of the negative comments, right? And people's like, "Oh, it's an honor to go and everything," but those people fail to forget that the women's soccer team has won before with previous presidents. She was on it. She's actually been to the White House with Obama, so it's not about disrespecting the office of the White House. It's about the person who's the president there. So what does she do right after that? She scores 2 goals
Yep.
to get the United States into the semifinals.
Yep. And just a little bit about her, too. She was one of the first people to kneel in solidarity with Colin Kaepernick.
Yes.
I just
And
wanted, I wanted to
one
say this.
quick-
Let me just say this real quick, because Bobby brought this up about reparations, and also, and rightfully so, with the gay rights movement. And then you go back and you look at the civil rights movement. But some of the things that our leaders and folks fought during the civil rights era, that fought for, that we're still going through today. And we had callers this morning that called in, and is that they are against the gay rights community? It's not that, but the question is, what about our rights? And what about us? And the question is, who is that on? Is that on the government, or is that on us to continue to champion our causes? Because we are still getting beaten because we are black and people of color. We're still being ridiculed because we are people of
Still
color.
being
You just
murdered.
saw,
Not
and
just
we're going to
beaten, but
go into the
being
presidential
murdered.
debate. Right, murdered. You talk about a presidential debate. How many issues that they talked about that dealt with black folks, specifically black folks issues?
Well, to me, to answer your question, it has to be both. You cannot rely on just one, the society or the government, to solve the problem. It has to happen together. So, and I think, too many times we look for someone else to solve our problem. So what you have more control over are the things that you can control and influence directly out there. That's why elections are so important. That's why voting is so important. You have a choice as to who you put in there, which means you have to do your homework, which means you should be making decisions that go beyond the physical look of some of the candidates, which we know a lot of people have done that.
And not
Very
just,
good.
and as we've said on this
good.
show many times, is that we saw this week with the Supreme Court ruling, as Brother Larry Ham has said over, it's not just national elections, it's local elections, it is state elections. We have to, all
Especially with the
politics
issue
are
of
local.
gerrymandering.
The old adage, that's what I'm referring to, the gerrymandering, Supreme Court ruling. All politics are local, and it starts local. And we've talked about in the show ad nauseum, having control of the state legislatures is critical. And so people have to be engaged, but not just when it's a presidential election or midterm when you're voting for a congressman or a senator. You need to vote for your local city councilman, your state senators, because that's critical.
And also
And-
knowing that it doesn't end after the election too, right? That you have to hold people, that you have to hold people accountable beyond that point. Like once they're in office, that's where actually the real work begins, where you make sure that you have your demands and that they're being met and they weren't just placating to you in order to get your vote. And I think it is possible, Fatine, to learn from each other's struggles and what people do, right? And the only thing I would caution with the way you posited that question is that there's a little bit of erasure then, right? In terms of Black and brown people who are part of the LGBTQ community. Because let's remember, like the highest number of trans women that are being killed are Black. So when you put it like that, when you exclude, because they're part of both struggles, civil rights and that too. So it's important that it doesn't become
I said it specifically the way I said it, is that I wasn't excluding. I was talking about the gay rights movement in a sense of that umbrella, and I'm talking about the civil rights movement in a sense of that umbrella. I wasn't excluding.
And not
black-
mutually
black-
exclusive.
black-
And not
black-
mutually exclusive,
right,
absolutely.
exactly.
Black people should still advocate for Black issues.
Exactly.
Is nothing
Exactly.
wrong
That's
with
what
Black
I'm
people
saying.
Right.
talking about issues that affected our community. There's nothing wrong with Black leaders saying the word Black or saying African American
Absolutely.
community as opposed to people of color, because a lot of time people of color kind of glosses over the specificity of, well, all the oppressions, but in particular African American oppression. And with regard to the presidential debate, a lot of that debate was framed by the commentators who were asking the questions.
It's framed by the media.
Right. And this
And that's
raises
a major that's a major problem.
And there were Black commentators on that panel, and Black journalists have a role to play to make sure that Black issues are addressed. Now, I heard you on the radio show, and you mentioned how Reverend Sharpton said, well, I ran because I wanted to bring up Black
to make
issues.
sure that-
right.
yeah,
And that's true. So the Black candidates had a responsibility to bring up Black issues, but also those Black journalists had Lester Holt, who is now considered a premier journalist, had a responsibility. And I don't think he asked any questions
He's a
that
lightweight.
had anything to do with Black
a
people.
lightweight.
I think Cory Booker was the only one who discussed criminal justice reform, and other than that, I don't really remember anybody else.
Well, let's
I
take a look at. I mean, and I'll kick it off with you, Brother Keeley. Let's take a look at the debates. Let's look at. Everybody's talking about Thursday night over Wednesday night, but I want us to critique both nights. Let's start with Thursday night first. Brother Keeley, kick it off.
First of all, I watched both nights throughout, and I can't tell you how unsettled I was by the spectacle of it all. The media is fundamentally responsible, in my estimation. Not Hillary Clinton, not the Russians, not people who didn't. The media is fundamentally responsible for giving Donald Trump a pass for 2 years before we acknowledge that he is a liar, that he lies all the time, that he is a BS artist, as it were.
And incompetent.
And yes, number one. Number two, the media is in charge of this entire election cycle, which is to our detriment. I'm telling you, they are not interested in democracy. We are at a point in this country right now where we are facing the rise of fascism and the dismantling of liberal democracy in this country, of constitutional democracy. And the media is treating this era as if it's another reality show. And raise your hand if you are. The fundamental point, other than climate change, is defeating Donald Trump. And the DNC, the Democratic Party, has allowed the media to orchestrate and construct the parameters by which we look at these issues. No one consistently prosecuted Donald Trump and why he is a danger to democracy. Nobody did it. There, people touched on it. People talked more about issues which are absolutely necessary to talk about. However, what's the principal contradiction? The principal we will not be able to deal with any of these issues if we don't focus on getting that fascist and his administration out of office. The DNC, and then I'll let everyone, the DNC has not told the American people about how important gaining control of the Senate is and the state legislatures. And we're treating this election cycle as we are allowing the abnormal to be normal.
Excellent point, brother. Excellent point, and very
I'm
passionate point.
scared that the Democrats may lose.
There's only one thing
very
that I
passionate.
just disagree. The only thing I don't know if it's the disagreement, but the point is that yes, Trump should be an issue, but you have so many candidates right now that's on this stage that we have to decipher between. We got to pick someone.
I think I think that was a mistake. I'm sorry, a mistake and a fault of the Democrat Party by saying to 99.9% of them, look, you know, and we know you're not going to get the nomination. The Democratic Party needed to zero in and focus. It's the whole way that it approached this particular election cycle, given the nature of what is happening in our country.
Absolutely.
These are not normal times.
Absolutely.
But
Let me, if I may,
just
if I
on
may,
that point,
Yeah,
real
I
quick,
cut-
sorry.
they cut Jamie
Sorry,
off.
just
I
real quick,
Yes,
sorry,
sir.
Jamie. Just on
sorry.
that
No,
point
sorry.
where I think the DNC got so much heat because of the way, like what happened with Bernie. I always look at Larry. What happened with Bernie? So they didn't want to make it appear that they were excluding anybody. So this is their way to weed out.
I understand.
The candidates.
I understand.
And if I may,
However,
and that is, and if I may, and that is an issue. And you referenced, like, going back to something Larry said last week's show. There were so many disparate platforms, right? And in the Democratic Party, honestly, as I watched, I said this party right now is so divided because everyone is jostling just for attention, and most of those candidates know they don't have a snowball's chance in hell to win the election. So this is all about, being self-serving. And
gaining money.
Well, absolutely.
For their
that's
treasure.
what I mean. Self-serving. It's
Making
follow the
money
money.
off of donorships.
No question. Follow the
What
money.
What happens to it afterwards?
Follow the money. And so right now, as you said, Brother Achille, again, very passionately, this should be about defeating Trump. Point blank, period. Now, this is the democratic process, and everyone should have the opportunity to present themselves and present their case. But what I saw is a party that really has no clear platform, that really doesn't have a clear and I think very cohesive sense of what we need to do and how we're going to move forward for team to defeat this man.
And you know why? Because the Democratic Party should be, if it is not, it should be representative of all of the disparate, oppressed groups in the United States. And we name them all the time. And that's the fundamental problem in confronting the Trump administration and the Republican Party, because the Republican Party only has one constituency and one line, and that is you, white Americans, are losing power.
Absolutely.
And we, the Democrats, or those who believe in democracy, have to struggle for black issues. We have to struggle for women's issues, and all rightfully so, for gay issues, immigrant issues.
It's a
and
lot to-
everybody,
But as Sister
and
Nita
can't
says-
please everyone at the same time,
Absolutely.
at the same moment. But the Republicans are laser focused.
Well, they're
But as
always-
Sister Nita says, she always says the
Laser
messaging, and you always talk
I
about
was
the
just going to say
messaging.
that they're
And
always on message.
Always
and the
on
thing
message,
is, like,
because the message is very clear.
Right,
We
and-
can use fear to
and-
get our message out, and fear is a primal emotion.
Of course, fear is the biggest motivator to do anything, unfortunately. And the Dems, like, while it's so important to hear all the policies and, differentiate between what each candidate wants to do, the problem is the messaging, where it's like Democrats will bring a pontificating thought to a knife fight. And I said that in 2016. And the problem is you need, like, quick hits, bumper sticker type things to get people riled up.
Well, let's talk
Like,
about that.
the biggest
Well, let's
applause,
talk about
the
that.
biggest applause, wait, the biggest applause the first night was when Inslee said that the biggest threat, the geopolitical threat
Donald
to
Trump.
us was
Donald
Donald
Trump.
Trump.
Yes.
Because that's what the base wants, and that's what people want. They
Let's
want
talk
to
about
fight.
this. Let's talk about the second. I'm going to the second night. We could go both nights, but let's talk about the folks that are in the polls leading
Right,
candidates.
right.
You're talking about Biden. You talk about Bernie. You talk about Warren. But
Right.
let's talk about Thursday night, because Jamie, that's where we went, and also I want to talk about, because we're not hearing much about Bernie neither, but Biden, he was the leading guy in the polls.
Well, we're not hearing much about Bernie because the corporate media
Is
has
pushing Warren.
identified Bernie as their main
socialist.
adversary, the one that they don't want to win.
Because
And
he's an
I think,
open
can I speak?
Democratic.
Can I,
yeah, sure.
Thank you, brother.
He's an open
Can-
Democrat socialist. Go ahead.
Yeah, but-
Be a moderator like a debate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
I
but I'm
wanna
talking
be
about
uninterrupted.
the debate. I'm talking about what the points
Well,
that Bernie
the
brought up
internet
that night.
To interrupt. Go ahead.
Thank you. No, I think, first of all, I think we have so many candidates in the race because the Democratic Party establishment wants to drown out the message of Bernie Sanders. It's very interesting that on Friday, the Wall Street Journal editorial board said that the winner of the debate was Bernie Sanders. The editorial
Journal
board,
did?
the Wall Street Journal,
They're one of the
see that.
only that said that.
they're not the only ones that said that. The Atlantic magazine said that Bernie Sanders' ideas won the debate. Now, what do they mean about that? Do they support Bernie Sanders? No. What they're saying is that more than any other candidate, Bernie Sanders has changed, has literally flipped the agenda of the Democratic Party. And both nights, whether you talk about Wednesday night or Thursday nights, most candidates were defining themselves either through their agreement with Bernie Sanders or their disagreement with Bernie Sanders. But all of them had to acknowledge Bernie Sanders. All of them, all the candidates now are saying they support some form either of universal health care or Medicare for all. Most of them are saying that there has to be a $15 minimum wage. Bernie says that we must abolish all the student debt. Most of them are saying something must be done about the cost of a college education. So, number one, I think there's so many candidates in the race, and that the national leadership has taken a different position from 16 because they want a brokered convention. Their biggest fear, the establishment Democrats, is that Bernie Sanders could, in fact, get enough delegates to get the Democratic Party nomination. So since they can't silence him, they drown him out by permitting other people to that wouldn't have happened in 16. You wouldn't have had 20 candidates and 2 nights of debate. I mean, it's a good thing. It's a nice thing democratically. So I think that going forward, I agree with Bobby. What Bobby said, we have to look at the platform, and clearly, Bernie Sanders has a very clear platform. It is a platform that benefits the majority of people in this country, and the rulers, the corporate establishment, don't want that. MSNBC has virtually eliminated Bernie Sanders from the discourse, and you're going to see more of this.
That's
as
not true.
but
I've seen
but
him
at
on
the same time,
MSNBC.
let me get two of our viewers in here, right? So Diane, Stephen, to your point, Larry, where were all these candidates when Hillary Clinton ran? Why didn't they just in the race? Why didn't be in the race back then? Democratic Party wanted to back Clinton. That was a wrong move. And then Edward Latson shared. So we went from parties with views to parties who are nothing more than base strokers.
Yes. Let me say this. I agree with everything you said. The Wall Street Journal's larger point was that the Democrat Party is moving more and more and more to the left, thanks to Bernie Sanders. What Warren and Harris and other people who are trying to capture the nomination have said, telegraph to corporate media and corporate America. Warren said, "I'm a capitalist to the bone." Kamala Harris said, "I am not a socialist, I am a capitalist." Everyone has denounced the socialist label, but have embraced socialist policies, tuition forgiveness, and all the things that you spelled out. So they undermine and usurp Bernie Sanders because he's incorruptible, but they embrace all of his program in order to get the nomination during the primary season of the base. And then during, if any of them get elected, watch what they do. They'll turn around and they'll work with the powers that be. So
Kamala already, remember?
She
changed on, what was it, when they asked that question, like, did you give up? And she raised her hand and she's like,
so this is bait and
misunderstood.
switch. This is bait and switch. This is bait and switch.
You know, one of the things that Akili and I were talking about, right, and it's just a pet peeve of mine in this political arena, is that society in general just seems to be it's either or extreme, right? It has to be this
binary
or that, right? So exactly, binary, right? So as you were talking, Akili, this point about socialists, so that the Republicans use that as fear. Socialism is bad. But when you start to break down the examples of where you want to integrate some socialistic views and platforms, they actually make sense, right? When you look at the Affordable Care Act, it has aspects of socialism, which, by the way, has stayed in there, right? Which is why it's been so hard. So when the voters are listening to this, I just ask you, don't look for the pure black and white. Look at really what they're saying and what it means. Just because someone has a view that someone deemed a socialist view, it doesn't make it wrong. Just like when they say there's a capitalist view, there are some capitalist views that make sense as well. But when you live in extremes, you can never satisfy everyone out there.
Absolutely, and I think MSNBC certainly deserves the criticism that some are giving them. After the debate Thursday night with Kamala Harris, they made it about the theatrics, her performance, and she was just it was so moving and gripping. Well, these elections aren't about theatrics and performances. Donald Trump.
Unfortunately,
no. Donald Trump, and let's say this.
You're saying that Kamala Harris was about.
Hold on. Listen, no. I'm going to be unequivocal. I'm going to be unequivocal in this. Well, she said nothing in terms of platforms that Bernie hasn't presented, that Elizabeth Warren has presented, that any other candidate. Hold on, let me finish. Hasn't. Let me finish. Hasn't presented. Let me finish.
I'm letting you finish.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
What? And it upset me because they are pushing her now. They, as you said, they tried to drown out Bernie. Now they're creating this narrative that she looked like the person that could beat Trump. Based on what? Based on a single debate? That's not going to determine
Did Biden
whether
look like he could beat Trump?
Exactly.
That's not.
Does Biden look like he could beat Trump?
But
I'm
that's
not pushing.
his point.
That's
just
not
saying,
my
I'm just
point.
saying.
I am.
Fatim,
But
that's
see,
not his
here we go
point.
again. But see, we
That's
keep
not
talking about
his
Biden,
point.
and that's the thing. She went, and her strategy was to attack Biden
He
and go after
said
Biden.
that she was just about theatrics. And
No,
I
No,
disagree
no,
with
no,
him.
no. That's not what I said.
The media
What
is.
Thank
the
you.
Media
The media is
creating
pushing
that.
and creating and shaping that narrative.
Yeah, but that's
For me,
where we
hold
are.
on.
We have Donald Trump as a
but that's
president.
not. But
We're
that's
like
the problem.
worst.
No. Let me say this.
but-
Let me say
You're
this.
missing
Okay,
that.
so you don't-
I'm talking about
think
me
it
as a
was-
voter.
All right,
Me as
let you
a
go.
oh, me.
Let me make
Let him
Me
make
as a
his
voter,
point.
and me as a voter, and I did my, when I say informal poll, I talk to people and have conversations as we do during the week all the time. I mean, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s. This wasn't in 60s. This wasn't about any generational issue, because again, I spoke to people, mostly men, but a few women, and each and every one of them said the same thing, pretty much, that there was no authenticity. It didn't come off as authentic. And then the next day when you create these T-shirts, off your line that you made, it wasn't authentic. They weren't moved by it. I certainly wasn't moved by it. That's not to say that she's not a good candidate. But let's stop. MSNBC clearly, if they didn't go in with agenda, afterwards their agenda was created.
I
Clearly
disagree.
they had
I
an
disagree.
agenda.
I disagree.
But I just want to say this, Jamie. I said this to you on that thing.
No.
As I
We-
said,
right afterwards, in real time.
if they did have an
real time.
agenda,
Fatigue,
the same
fatigue.
way that Fox had an agenda with Trump.
But we're missing
So,
the
so
point.
is there
The
this
point
such
is
wrong?
that-
Is there? Let me just present the question to him. Is it so wrong at the end of the day for them to have an agenda?
Was she any more impressive than Elizabeth Warren was Wednesday night?
Yeah, but why are you?
Hold on, let me
but
finish.
why you've been speaking the whole
Absolutely
time?
not.
But why are you discounting her and not discounting Elizabeth Warren?
I'm not
All
discounting
Biden.
They're,
I'm
okay.
not
No,
discounting
and at the
her.
end of the day, she needed to do that because Biden is the front runner, right? So she went in, yes, calculated to go after him, but that's what her job was to do because she wants to move
missing
ahead.
the major
this
point.
is a
Do you
debate.
understand
she
what-
wants
I
to
was
win.
just shocked.
And at
We're
the end-
talking
and
about
at the
this
end of the day-
issue
Okay,
in the-
Kelly, I'm not done yet. Wait, and at the end of the day, right? She's the only one on that stage who looked as if she could take it to Donald
I
Trump.
disagree.
We're missing.
And
No, hold on.
because you have
We're
to be-
missing
So
the
who
entire.
have to
so
be
then
on-
who,
What
Jamie?
do you mean?
So
Take
Jamie,
it to-
so
And
who
you
looked-
have-
guys,
in terms
guys,
of fighting
guys,
toe to toe
who
and
looked
going
like
with
they could
him.
take Trump on
we
Thursday night?
all know. No,
No,
we-
let him answer the question.
Okay, I'm going to answer this question.
Answer the
You guys
question.
are basing it on a
No.
performance.
But
It's
that's
not
what it
about
is.
standing
It is
face
a
to face with
performance.
Trump.
No.
That's
It's all
not
a
what
performance.
But that's not what's going to move voters.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Absolutely,
Oh,
it
we
is.
just- you gotta-
Unfortunately,
any single
We are
person I
facing
spoke to-
fascism in this country, and we're talking about performance.
That's what it is.
Right here. I have the
Where-
We are
We're in-
facing
we're in
the
a terrible
demise
position.
of democracy.
All right, wait, one at a time. One at a time.
We are
They're
facing.
laughing.
We are facing the demise of democracy
We're
in
already
America.
there. We're already there.
And we
already
are
let it
talking
happen.
about performance.
We-
We all know Trump needs to leave. We all know what he is. We don't have to convince the majority of the American people what he is. So it doesn't matter who can, quote unquote, best
It absolutely
let me now,
does.
please
It
let me finish.
does.
No, it
best
does
him,
not.
best him in a debate.
Thank you.
Because he doesn't deserve to be debated. He is a fascist and a danger to
Unfortunately,
No,
you're wrong, Achilles.
No, he's not.
You're wrong, Achilles.
You're
No,
wrong.
he's not.
Achilles.
No, he's
You're
absolutely
absolutely
I'm gonna
right.
tell you why.
He's absolutely
Let me
right.
tell you, I'm gonna tell you why he's wrong.
This
And I'm
is
gonna tell you
all
why he's right.
I'm gonna tell you why he's wrong.
And I'm gonna tell you why he's
I'm gonna
right.
tell you why
This
he's
is
wrong.
all
Because Trump
spectacle.
Let me just say this. You just said that he's not worthy of a debate. He is the president of the United States.
I don't
We're
give a
the-
damn.
I know you don't give a damn. I don't give a
And
damn.
the
either. But he's in a different position going into this 2020
We
election.
are normalizing him when you say that.
He's already
You
been
are-
normalized.
no,
He's the
no.
president of the United States.
You're allowing him to be
He's been normalized.
You
He's
have
been
to,
normalized.
these elections,
He's
hold on.
normalized.
So everybody, catch your breath. Catch your breath. Go to your corners. Let me read some of the viewers because they're part of this as well. DB4IP. Bernie came across as rather angry old man. Biden came across as confused confused at times, but this is the first of 12 debates, many more to go. Brainsaurus, Fatim is missing the point on Kamala. Kirsten Plant, I like Nither spelling, but it seems like she always has to have the last word. She will literally cut them off to get it. A. Musa
I barely get a
Ahmad,
word in.
Kamala cut Marianne Williamson off when she was talking reparations and instead changed the focus to busing.
Yeah.
Shake my head.
Good point.
Edward Latson, as long as NBC is the official network for the DNC debates, whatever they want to talk about is the message. Audie Autumn, socialism is communism equal USSR equals Cuba equals Venezuela. A lot of examples.
And
Michael Dwyer, thanks for team. Oh, that was self-serving. That was self-serving. DB4IP panel, please calm down. Talking over each other.
Can I make a
Okay.
Biden comment? Biden is like Ozymandias. The Bertolt Brecht wrote a poem about Ozymandias, the Colossus with the feet of clay. And the Democrats are going to have difficulty because Kamala Harris launched the first attack on Biden on his record in segregation. And there are going to be other attacks because Biden has been a right-wing Democrat. It's not just that he has the ball. He's been a right-wing Democrat. And I remember how I felt when Obama, who I voted for in 8 and in 12, how I felt when he chose Biden.
And he did that because he's a right-wing Democrat.
And it just let the air out of our sails. And the second time was when Obama gave his inauguration speech in 8. He made this reference to the Bible, and he said, it's a reference that when I was a child, I acted like a child, but now I'm a man. See, that was a backhanded insult to the progressive agenda because he was making it clear what path that he was going in. And lastly, why is this thing with Trump defeating? Trump must be defeated. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. But it's not enough to say we must defeat Trump. Do we want to return? We can defeat Trump and still have Trumpism.
That's true.
Or we can defeat Trump and go back to the stifling neoliberal environment that we were in, you know, at the first part of the 21st century. It is time. This moment is prescient. It is time for us to move the country in a new direction. The reason why almost the entire Democratic field is moving to the left is because the masses of the people are suffering.
Thank you.
They can't pay their rent. They can't pay off their student loans.
Working
they
two,
work
3 jobs.
two
Yeah.
jobs and still don't make enough money. They got hospital bill. They scared to go to the hospital because even with insurance, you're going to have co-pays and premiums. So we need a break with the past.
Exactly. Let me hold on.
But I
let me
need to
just make this
say,
one point. No, let me make this one point before we move forward. Before we move forward. I don't. No, because Fatine, I'm not a Biden supporter. I haven't made my decision in terms of who I think they are very good candidates. Now, everyone on this panel knows, they should know, Stacey Abrams is the person that I'm supporting more than anyone. She's not running. She's the one who I know some people said was lack of experience, state legislator. To me, she was the most, absolutely in Georgia. She was, to me, and remains the most
Biden
impressive,
might pick her
the
as
most
VP.
impressive candidate out there in the Democratic Party. So I just want to be clear on that. My point was how the media, and we know the media frames these issues, they frame who they want to push forward, they frame the narrative, and you're right, Fox does it. Roger Ailes, we know, and continuing with Fox, they are masters of that. And I'm not saying,
Trump say this?
yeah, no, I understand it. I understand it, but to go back to Larry's point, then what you do, and this is very strategic and intentional, you try to drown out and marginalize other candidates who should receive more time and attention because they are laying out clear platforms. And as Larry said, platforms that Bernie has been pushing that others are now adopting.
See,
Yes,
I-
it is no accident. It
He
is
was
no
great. Castro was
accident
great.
Very
that Elizabeth Warren would undercut Bernie Sanders by adopting all of his critique of capitalism, but yet say to the entire world, I am a capitalist to the bone.
Yeah, but she
She's
said
sending
with,
us.
she said
Please
with
let
changes.
me finish.
No,
Please
no,
let
but
me finish.
I want to
Please let-
clarify what she said. She said, I'm a capitalist, but I want changes and I want to hold them accountable.
And that's BS, if I may say so.
I don't-
Because
I don't
I'm not
agree.
talking about you. You can disagree, but let me finish my point. Neither.
Go
Let me
ahead, go
finish
ahead.
my. Neither.
You've been
please.
talking, go
You
ahead.
know, because and so have you. You know,
Barely.
arguing about
Barely.
something and yet bowing to its contradictions is you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. The only true Democrat and socialist, the only true criticizer and someone who would fight to systemically change bourgeois democracy and capitalism in America is not Elizabeth Warren. She will apologize. She will make Band-Aid changes. And she's told everybody that. She's signaled that to corporate America. Yes, I want you to change this and I'll fight for. And it's shrill hypocrisy.
So let's go back to the
Absolutely.
question.
Okay.
Now, Julian Castro, you just mentioned that he had a solid night. Does he have
Castro
a chance?
was great.
He has a very good chance
Castro
of being a
was
vice
great, and
presidential
honestly,
contender.
Castro
Vice
should have
presidential
been
nominee.
Castro should have been Hillary Clinton's pick in 2016. But at that time, she was too busy getting the milk toast. Do nothing. Like, what did Tim Kaine do exactly? So instead of actually
thumbed her
having,
nose at
okay,
the
can I speak now?
progressives.
Can I speak
She
now? Thank
thumbed her
you.
nose at the
Can I
progressives.
speak,
I
Achilles?
agree with
Okay,
you.
you're okay.
I
okay,
agree with
I can
you.
speak. Thank you. So instead of having a Latino,
goose and gander, neither?
instead of having a Latino on her ticket, she found a white guy who could speak Spanish. So that said a lot to me in terms of what they care about, the base and about people of color too. And though I agree with you, Jamie, and I'm very critical of the media, as we know, all the time, but I don't agree that they're pushing Harris in that regard, because if you watched even after the debates, they sat down with every single candidate. They brought everybody up. They interviewed everyone. They didn't give anybody more time than another person. And at the end of the day, if you look, that moment between her and Biden was the most. This is where we are. We live in the world of theater and entertainment. Unfortunately, as much as I hate it, as much as we all hate it, and I wish people looked at the issues, this is where we are. And that moment between her and Biden was the most capturing, the most energizing, the most whatever you want to call it. So of course they had to focus on that because he is the front runner right now, and she directly challenged him.
Okay,
Acknowledge-
let me just say this is why I disagree. They did give the candidates equal time afterwards. It's not about the time they gave them, it's about how they framed it.
Exactly.
She, it was like, Muhammad Ali, just a
Exactly.
decisive victory. I didn't see that. Once again, I spoke to and communicated with multiple people during the debate and afterwards. My mom, I watched the debate with her, a black woman, an octogenarian. She was like, okay.
And
So she wasn't, people were fawning over her. I was shocked. Off of a moment. And the problem is we cannot make these campaigns when we have to, as Achilles said, have laser focus on defeating Trump, and as Brother Larry said, and not putting another neoliberal in there who essentially is going to have the same policies under the guise of progressivism, then that's to me is the issue. I'm focused on the policies, the platforms. People care about their pockets. People care about health insurance. Those are the issues I'm not saying are important. Climate change is a critical issue because it ties into that. But we have to focus what the American people
On
right now focus
that point, let me put this in some context and pose a question to both the history brothers in there. So, what Kamala Harris went after Joe Biden with was around busing, right? So that was her big blow, right? So she benefited from busing. But as you go back to that time, what was in place was Jim Crow laws that basically we all would agree unconstitutional and were wrong, that forced people of color to certain neighborhoods and schools. And so the concept of busing back then, correct me if I'm wrong, was we're going to change Jim Crow by forcing people of color to go to different schools. When you think of it, it's actually the same as Jim Crow. You're forcing someone to go somewhere versus putting better quality schools in those neighborhoods. So could you share just your view around busing? Because to me, it seemed like she went after Joe Biden.
It was an opportunity.
And it was an opportunity. And it
was brilliant.
It really blurred really what he was trying to do back then around busing.
The history around busing early on in the 60s is controversial because there were black intellectuals, there were black activists, black organizations that were askance, looked at busing. I should not have to have my black son or daughter sit next to a white student in order to get a decent education. But the powers that be at the time contending to change de facto and de jure segregation were not willing to struggle for, as what Brother Pickett called for often, for change in how public schools are funded and expanding regional control of various communities and counties, and to equalize the distribution of public funds to all schools. But it was a Band-Aid, it was a bad Band-Aid, and it led to people like Kamala Harris gaining a very good education where she went, and it helped many, many black and brown students, but it had negative consequences as well.
Right. You could argue busing a number of ways. There's an academic argument around busing, its efficacy as far as actually improving education, and then there's the political fight around busing. And the fact of the matter is, on the political fight, the segregationists, the racists, the Klan, etc., opposed busing. And among those were their elected representatives like Eastland, with whom Biden had gotten support, to oppose busing in, I believe it was Delaware. And I've been to Delaware, and
So
Delaware,
have I.
like Southern Jersey, racism is all over. Right. Racism is all over. So the short of it is that the racists opposed busing, and there were black people that opposed busing too. That they would.
Did you oppose busing?
Huh? Well, we actually had to go to court because we protested Louise Day Hicks when she came to Princeton, and we disrupted her presentation.
The reason why I asked for a reason, because 1973, you're talking about someone who is, I'm 11 years old.
Right.
And I'm watching the situation in Brooklyn.
Right.
With the busing of the kids out of Bed-Stuy, Brownsville.
Right.
Into New Utrecht High School. It was,
Right.
This became at least here locally, it became a big issue. Right. And the white folks did not want them out there. It got down to the white folks threatening, and the gangs in Brooklyn threatened to come out there. Right. So as an 11-year-old kid, I remember discussing with my mother that, and I remember, and I said it with passion, that I was against busing. I was for making the schools equal, right, where that we had the same type of books, the same type of education, right, as the white community, right, instead of trying to send us out there. They didn't want us out in their community, right, and it wasn't helping us because we were going out there and we didn't want to be out there neither. So I looked at busing from that point of view as an 11-year-old at the time, right, is that I disagreed with it. I thought that there was a better way of dealing with public education,
right,
for people
and there were
of
a
color.
lot of black people that looked at it that way. But on the other hand, just as Achilles said, Kamala Harris and thousands of other black students, yes, got a better education because they were able to go to, yes, suburban schools.
And my brother was a student at Harvard in Boston when it got violent.
Oh yeah.
With the busing, and what people often don't understand is how traumatic the experiences were, yes, for the students that were being bused. And so there was certainly pros and cons to it. I just felt that at that moment during the debate, again, it was something that, for me, I think it's important. You know, it's an important issue because that is part of Biden's history. It's part of speaking to who he is. But I think what we see here today with us, this is a microcosm of the Democratic Party in the
Yes,
nation.
it is.
Extremely divided. And while issues of busing, you know, certainly we can look at everything in hindsight, we have to look at what we need to do moving forward. People are interested in, certainly, I think, conscious of, again, that being part of every candidate's fiber or whomever was part of that. But what are we focusing on now? What are we going to do now? Right. And I agree with the Wall Street Journal. I agree with Larry. I'm looking at it objectively. I thought Bernie was the one who was consistent and continually putting forward those policies and articulated those policies better and the platform better than anyone on the stage.
That's third. Whoa, Jamie, was that?
And I'm not
Jamie,
supporting Bernie in terms of, when I say I'm not supporting him, Bernie will get my vote. Right. Biden will get my vote. Kamala will get my vote if I feel at the end of the day this is the person, not necessarily the person who has the best chance of beating Trump, because I think we have to do that, but is the best person of moving us forward.
My question to you, you just made a statement. Do you think that, and not to take away from not Biden, but Bernie. Going back to Wednesday night, you're telling me that you think that Bernie. How do you think Bernie and Warren did? Again,
I'm looking at how people were presenting the platforms that are meaningful and the policies that are meaningful to me, and how they would implement it, right. And making, you know, clearly the distinction between what we see now with the Republicans with Trump, what we certainly have seen in the past, and the current circumstances and how we can change that. That's what's important to me.
You saw Bernie over Warren.
Yeah, I thought Bernie was very strong. I thought Warren was strong, but I would say that yes, because Bernie's been consistent.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Bernie is not doing this for political expediency like some others. These candidates,
I agree with you.
These candidates are changing with the wind.
Bernie has been consistent.
You know what's on Twitter? Okay, well, this is the way Twitter's moving, so that's how we'll move. No, he's consistent. And again, for me,
a little surprised at how quiet Bernie and Warren were, especially like the second hour of the first debate. Like,
well, they
Warren,
were separated. They weren't in the same.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. But they both were quieter than what I expected. Like Warren, for instance, in the first hour, she was really strong and spoke out a lot. But the second hour, she wasn't as involved.
She coasted. She didn't have to.
Yeah, and Bernie, same thing too. So I was a little surprised at that. I was a little shocked at both of them for doing that.
Well, what he was responding to was the aegis charges that Swalwell,
Swalwell.
That Swalwell was lodging against Biden.
Yes.
And so that pissed Bernie off because it was aegis. And he said so after the debate in front of cameras and reporters. But let me get back to a comment. The Wall Street Journal said that Bernie Sanders won not because of his performance, but because his ideas were embraced by the top leading candidates. But that was a backhanded slap, actually, because the Wall Street Journal is trying to say to Republicans and to Trump, you can label them socialists. You can defeat the Democrat Party by simply labeling them all socialists. So Bernie won the two nights ideologically, programmatically, but you can attack them for the very same reason. So it was a backhanded compliment.
Well, we're going to see. I just want to say this because, and I'm going to let Bobby read a couple of comments, but we got a couple more things that we definitely want to mention before we end. Bobby, you have some comments real quick?
Yes, Lorenzo Smallwood. Lorenzo Smallwood.
Wait, is there a bad one?
I do have to find that one.
Let me see that one.
Wait, let me find that one. Pat. Where's Pat? Pat. Well, I have to. I have to scroll
Please
up.
Read it.
Anyway, Pat said, Achilles is back. Unfortunately.
He searched it out.
Thank you, Pat. It's good to see you too, sis.
Michael Dwyer, as they thin the herd, they may talk about reparations, but in a watered-down way.
Yes.
You got DB4IP. Trump would love to run against Bernie. He wants to run against someone he thinks he can beat. Bernie is tailor-made for Trump's name-calling. Got Lorenzo Smallwood. I grew up in North Carolina and I only attended black schools. But regardless, you have to continue to educate yourself every day. Education is forever. Nat Turner. I would never vote for Warren. She seems like she would help everyone except black folks if elected. And there's a couple others out there. So,
Judge, what do you think? You're so quiet over there. What do you think, Pete?
I'm just enjoying.
You're just observing.
He's enjoying. No mic there.
I think that
Judge
comment
is
on
sitting there saying,
Warren,
my man Trump is sitting pretty.
There you go.
that
There you
comment
go.
on Warren is really a very salient point, because what the who is it who said that?
DBI 4P.
4P DBI 4P is actually saying is that she doesn't have the emotional quotient. She doesn't inspire people, and therefore people don't trust her.
I don't agree. It's actually the opposite.
DB4IP says agreed. Warren is a better messenger of Bernie's message. Bernie will realize that and help her.
But what did you just say?
Yeah, but he also had that other
So
comment
apparently he
in there.
made both.
Yeah, he can't. Yeah, but he came
I
back
actually-
later and made that.
I've seen the
statement.
opposite because that's why like Warren has gone up in the polls because she's resonated more with the black community and with the Latino community
That is
and
very
especially
interesting.
women
That's
and especially
And I
women
think that's
because
media
she
spin
has
too.
no, it's
I
not
think-
media spin because even for instance when she spoke at let's say
Based on what?
Reverend Sharpton's National Action Network
she did-
convention,
she
right?
did do well with the black,
but she
community
specifically like she opened up talking about not only reproductive rights but maternal death rates and what black women have to go through, and she's been very vocal
been
and very
consistent on that.
strong
She's been
on a
consistent on
lot
that.
of issues,
That's
and that's
why I brought 'em up.
women are like, okay, it's women of color.
Well,
Well,
I've said
listen. We gotta move ahead because I'm not doing an hour and a half here today. All right.
should.
Before we go to the situation with the Supreme Court, I just want to mention that James A. Fields Jr. Do everybody know that name? That's the man who drove into the crowd of counter protesters in Charlottesville.
Life.
Well, yes, he was given life in prison, dealing with killing Heather Heyer. And that's something that we expected. We didn't expect it any less.
And to that point, Canada has just put racist hate groups on its official terrorist list.
Wow,
Good for them.
Good for Canada.
Good for Justin Trudeau.
Now, we need that here in the U.S. Now, that's one of the black issues that these candidates need to address.
You know, and
That's
it did come up in recent congressional hearings when they were I think it was asking Christopher Wray those questions, and he just kept alluding and just kept talking about how challenging it would be to do that. So I know that there's been some conversations, but it shouldn't be a one and done. They need to continue to press that.
Exactly. We had two Supreme Court decisions that came down this week. We had this situation with the census, and the Trump administration said that they needed a decision on this, so they know, in a sense of putting the census question on the census, the 2020 census. Well, they got the answer this week when the Supreme Court basically came back and said that basically they can't put this question on there unless they can prove otherwise, and they just really don't have enough time to get this question on there. And neither you
But
feel this is bias against the.
Oh yeah,
especially-
absolutely. It's just another way to scare the Latino community and other immigrant communities from participating in the census, which has a huge impact, as we know, on everything from representation to federal dollars that are distributed. So, and a lot of people are saying that some of the damage might already be done because the fear has been instilled in a lot of communities. But what I found really scary after the Supreme Court came out was what Donald Trump tweeted, saying that I'm going to have my attorneys look into this and maybe we can postpone the census so that the Supreme Court can rule correctly on
Very
this.
dangerous.
Which is so scary. Another dictatorial move, basically saying that until the Supreme Court rules the way I
Can
want
that be
them
done?
to,
Bob
But that
Pickett.
we're
it's an
going to push it
unimpeachable-
back.
It's
Bob
an
Pickett.
impeachable offense because it's in the Constitution.
One of
they
many.
have to do it.
They have to do it.
They have to do it every 10 years.
that- Bob,
so
pick
he
up your
can't.
mic.
He can't just not do it.
But
Bob,
could they find some loopholes?
Yeah, is that true?
That's a
That is-
question
I just
for
want
you,
to know.
Judge.
I just not.
Yeah, that is the case.
Right. It's okay. So that's good. Also, neither and panel Supreme Court said Constitution does not bar partisan gerrymandering, basically saying that the federal government should not be into join the districts. They kick it back down to the district
So
courts.
just before you go into that one, just one other thing on this, and Larry, you had touched upon this citizen, an answer that to me is connected to the citizenship. So we live in this world where there are political reasons for things, as you talk about for busing, and then there are some legal reasons for it. So back in 1950, this citizenship question was on the census, right? So you didn't necessarily have that fear back then. Now it's become political, and that's really what the Supreme Court has said, is like the reason you're given doesn't sound right.
Right.
It doesn't sound like you're legitimately trying to understand the mix of who's in the country for altruistic reasons, for all the right reasons. And so now they basically poisoned it because there's now emails and all these things that actually say that they had an ulterior motive for it, which is around holding on to voter rights and all those things there. So again, this is another example where there was a legitimate reason for that question that they now have dirtied and polluted. And kudos to the Supreme Court for just saying
wrote that,
and for
Bobby?
getting it out.
Guess who wrote that? Judge Roberts.
Yes.
Judge
Yes.
Roberts wrote that. That was very interesting.
He the swing man now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he also came back on the situation with gerrymandering where the vote.
Swing the other way.
Yeah.
Step forward,
Swing
5 steps
Go
back.
another way.
Right. Like he was
One step
Obamacare.
forward, 5
and
steps
then-
back.
Exactly. So they kick it back to the lower courts. But
Yeah.
now you're talking about with the upcoming elections there.
Yeah, it's
that
opening
who's
up the
controlling
floodgates,
it
yeah.
is that they're
And
going
of
to
course, Uncle Clarence wrote the dissenting vote in the other case. I mean, it's
That's
and I'm gonna
Pickett's
say
friend.
it's just one of the most
Disappointment. Right?
not disappointment. That's not even strong enough, man. He is one of the
Well, slaves still are here in America,
he
bro.
has done as much damage to the causes of black people, poor people, people of color. But as a black man to black people, then maybe any black man, certainly in a position of power in the history of this nation, and Thurgood Marshall has to be rolling around, as we use that phrase, given what this man has represented as someone who is sitting on the highest court in the land and whose decisions shape global policies for people of color.
You in America now, Toby.
Yep. And look at the games he's playing now.
The same man, as you said, that used to walk around with the dashiki. You know him well.
Yeah.
Power,
did
power
Mobutu.
to the people.
Bob, your
We
mic.
were in law
The
school.
mic, Bob.
Your mic.
So did
Your mic.
Mobutu.
Yeah.
We were in law school at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look at the games that the president is playing. Look, he goes into North Korea. He shakes Kim Jong's hand. He meets almost 50 minutes with him, moving forward that they're going to continue meetings dealing with
Spectacle.
nuclear arms and things like this. So
all
Trump can come
spectacle.
back. Exactly. You know where he's playing.
It's all spectacle.
Well, he's claimed that, he has calmed things down in the region and he doesn't get the media coverage and they're unfair and blah, blah, blah. But what, all of us who pay attention to this stuff actually knows that he actually causes things to rise and he escalates things only to come back in and to calm them down back to where they were when he first started.
Sounds like Iran.
Right,
That's
so
what
he
it
has
is.
not improved things, and it's a photo op. And speaking of Iran, right, and that's why I keep saying this incompetence, right? So he made a comment about Iran when he put the new sanctions in, about putting sanctions against Ayatollah Khomeini's family. Now, who's been dead for a while. So he doesn't even know the name of the current leader of Iran. And this is the man who almost had us go to war, who is sitting in the Oval Office with prepared notes and still gets the name of the Iranian leader wrong.
Well, he said he knows more about Iraq and Afghanistan, Iran, and the generals.
Incompetent. Incompetent.
What's gonna come out of? What do you think will come out of? Now we have Mueller. He's going to testify publicly July 17th. What do you think, if anything, is going to come out of his testimony here?
I don't think anything different than what was written in his report. He said he was not going to go any further, but again, we live in the age of spectacle, and those who want him to go before Congress want him to do so because it, and the media wants it as well, because it creates the news cycle that they can discuss and rant about and whatever. Everyone should have already read or be reading the Mueller report. We don't need to have him read it to us as if he's Mr. Rogers in order to know.
Or it's on audiobooks, right?
Audiobook. Although that would be cool. I wish they would put it on audiobooks for those who don't want to read. But my point is that we know what Trump
Do you think
has.
he could put pressure on Pelosi to move ahead with
No,
impeachment proceedings?
I think essentially it is about spectacle and keeping the Leviathan news media spinning and spinning and spinning.
I think
That's what
I
think
think Pelosi is
essential.
Pelosi is always concerned with her status and also making sure that the other centrist Democrats in her party are okay. And what really pissed me off this week was what happened with the border bill, because, you know, she went, so the Progressive Caucus, like AOC and all of them, asked for demands to hold ICE and all of this stuff going on at the border to hold them accountable. And they were just, you know, certain things like making sure kids have, I think, so that they're not held for.
They didn't have to stay after a certain time period. You had to move
Right,
them.
like after I think it was 90 days,
Right.
which is still a very long time, but they would be let out, and that there's certain, you know, safeguards for these kids and certain levels of accountability. Now, the Senate version, which ended up passing, basically what happened was Schumer, who should also be held accountable, completely capitulated and went along with the Senate version, and so did the Senate Democrats, a big chunk of them. So then the House had no option, which is what Pelosi said, she had no option but then to go along with this, and it's basically giving a blank check to this administration for billions of dollars. And they claim, so Pelosi claimed that Pence said to her that, oh yeah, we will, you know, we'll make sure we'll do some measures of accountability, but there's nothing written in paper, and we're supposed to just take this administration's word, the administration that is literally separating kids from their parents, that they're going to do the right thing. Please give me a break.
What is happening
What is that
on the
money going to
board?
be used for?
What is happening on the board?
I just want to go back to something you said. I just want to get this in here real quick. You just mentioned about Pelosi in the sense of the impeachment proceedings, and she hasn't moved on these impeachment proceedings yet. But
I didn't say anything about Pelosi.
Well, when I
No, I
said,
said
well,
it,
I
that
said
she-
no, I said when I said would it move her?
Oh, I see.
When I asked just now, the point I wanted to get to is
Your
are
mic.
we forgetting about the midterm elections, that we sent all these folks to Washington to do the work of the people, and the people's work was that we wanted to go after Donald Trump and to move to impeach him. So what are we doing, and what is Pelosi doing?
Exactly.
That's
Well,
my question.
I think that impeachment is going to happen. I think that the Mueller appearance is one of the prerequisites. Pelosi is trying to line up the situation so that when she finally gives in to impeachment, she's going to be held harmless. See, the party has a whole moderate faction, a centrist, a right-wing faction, and the right-wing and the centrist factions really don't want impeachment. You know, and they're not those factions for any silly reason. They're primarily
those
those
areas.
factions
Right.
because they come from purple districts. They come from districts where, you know, some Republicans voted for them. You take like, what's the young woman from New Jersey?
Which one?
Oh, I can't remember. I'm having brain freeze. The one that just got elected. Oh, Mickey. I can't think of the name of it. I'm sorry. But anyway,
what's her position?
the main point is that she comes from a mixed district. And so they're not, like you said, Fatim, all these Democrats were elected to deal with Trump. They're going to come to that bridge, and they're going to have to cross it. But I think there are just a number of things that have to be done. I'm not in agreement with it. I think they should impeach right now. But the Pelosi is Nitha said, represents the middle, and she wants to make sure before they come to that point that they're not going to suffer, that is, lose their seats when they do call for the
She's
And
run out
speaking
of
of
time.
messaging, as Nitha, very eloquently, and always, I think, passionately makes an important point with the Democrats. Fatine, expect Bill Barr to do a press junket in the week leading up to the hearing by Mueller. He's certainly going to be out there. Again, they're going to try to frame it and get in front of it before he testifies.
Right. I just want to say
and to that point,
right.
Barr immediately after the Mueller, this came out this week, immediately after the Mueller report, stopped 7 investigations. See, there was the Mueller report, but Mueller had opened up a number of other investigations.
I think there were 10 of them. I think there were 10, right?
Barr shut down 7 of them immediately after. This nobody knew this. This just came out this week.
Point. I just want to throw it to the sports brothers real quick. I know there's been a lot happening in sports. And I'll throw something in if you want to bring something up. The first thing is that maybe we should send all the major league teams over to London. If you saw the New York Yankee-Boston game yesterday,
incredible game.
Almost 60,000 people came out to that new
London
stadium. And the first thing is that the Yankees jumped off to a 6-0 lead in the top of the first. Boston came back and tied it in the bottom of the first.
Wow.
It went back and forth, no pitching. It was just offense. The Yankees won 17-13 with
Over
the
4
bases
hours.
loaded.
Yes.
If they would have hit a grand slam, it would have been 17-17. What a game. But I throw it to the sports brothers.
It was a new record in homers, right?
Yeah.
For a single game.
It wasn't not so much in homers, but just there were so many records in terms of the time of play, right? So it was over 4 hours and 40 minutes or something like that. The first inning went an hour.
Yeah.
Just in the first
An
inning.
hour?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Six,
They scored 12 runs combined.
Sounds
that
more
first
like
one.
cricket.
First time. Well, that's what someone said. Someone said, well, they're used to watching cricket over here, which games last for days.
Well, it's funny, right? Because part of the history of baseball is talked about as the American pastime, but it has its roots in London rounders, right? So the game rounders is actually the basis for what baseball is. And so, going back to that time, a lot of the expats and some of the local Brits, they had a good old time sitting in London Stadium watching this game, and they're right back in there right now playing.
And by the way, the Cricket World Cup is going on right now, and it's the most watched sport in the world, if people don't know. Not soccer, cricket is the most watched sport.
Now you mentioned
India
from
Yes.
the political
big
side
game,
of
billions of people.
the World Cup from the women's point of view. But let's talk about where we at the semifinals with the United States, and they have to play who?
Playing England.
England, that is correct. And if they win, because these games have been like 2-1, so
Very close.
very close.
Very close
So
games.
it's not a guarantee. And hopefully that the United States women can bring home the World Cup.
Yeah,
here.
and like I said, a couple of weeks ago, right? They can talk about consistency of performance. They have been at the top of their game almost every World Cup they've been in, plus the Olympics. And yet they are still vastly underpaid versus the men's team.
And underfunded.
Who have not been to a semifinal, let alone a quarterfinal.
Exactly.
Yes.
And here women now are on the door going to potentially in the semis going to the finals again. And again, like I said before, it is the #1 court case right now going on around gender pay.
Yep.
And now how they are just so
That
underpaid.
could apply to so many. That could be like a metaphor
Yeah.
for a larger.
It really is.
And as
It
we
really
approach
is.
Wimbledon, giving, kudos to Billie Jean King, and then Venus Williams took up the mantle to finally get women equal pay in the men in tennis. And so Billie Jean King was at the forefront of that. And then Venus Williams certainly, took up the mantle, and they pushed and pushed and pushed.
And as you gentlemen stated at the beginning of the show about the politics surrounding the women's team, about being invited to Washington if they win, Ocasio-Cortez says, you know what? If they win, I will invite the U.S. women's soccer team to the House of Representatives. So
She
that's
accepted.
that's
Rapinoe accepted.
Rapinoe,
She
yeah,
accepted
yeah.
Ocasio-Cortez's
There you go. So-
invitation.
And-
and as Nitha said before, right? Rapinoe was the first white athlete to kneel in unison with Colin Kaepernick.
yeah.
You know?
She's
and
not,
so her appeal is because she's of a gay background. she doesn't like what this administration is doing on a lot of fronts, but particularly the rollback of some of the progress that was made under the Obama administration to LGBTQ.
Right.
And one of the great players in national team history for the women. So she's an activist, but she's also a phenomenal
Great
player, which has
athlete,
given her the platform to do this.
And my last question for the sports brothers is, of course, kudos to the Toronto Raptors for, of course, winning the NBA championship.
And Drake.
You know, but do you think that we are starting to see the paradigm of basketball changing? Some of the bigger cities now coming back into play, like Los Angeles, like New York, like Chicago, with stronger teams because it's better business for the NBA?
No, I really don't, right? The NBA is such a global sport right now that they make money from so many different markets, right? So just the broadcast rights globally, they get so many people in China. So, here's a little known fact. One of the bench players on Toronto, Jeremy Lin, we all remember when he was in New York,
Yes.
Linsanity. Just the fact that he was on Toronto was a reason for those in Taiwan to watch late night or early morning to see whether he would get in or not. So they were happy to. So the NBA is such a global sport right now that the dependency on the New Yorks, Los Angeles, and Chicago's, that's not necessary. I mean, during the year, you want them for TV ad, dollars and everything. But when it comes to the playoffs, it is such a global brand. You have so many Europeans who were playing in it. The center for Toronto, who ended up, not Toronto, on Portland, who ended up getting hurt. Nurkic. When he got hurt, he had a big following over in Eastern Europe.
Right.
And so there's so much eyes around the world watching it. The days of New York needing to be dominant and Los Angeles from a global scale. So
Global, but what about domestically?
Locally,
domestically.
Listen, locally, the Garden still sells out, even though they haven't been in the playoffs forever. The Lakers still sell out because it's still Showtime. It's a place to be. So they get a little buzz and some sizzle now that the Lakers have, they had LeBron now. They got Anthony Davis. There's talks maybe Kawhi may want to join them. I'm not buying
got the
that.
money now.
Brooklyn is on the rise, as I've been saying all year. They're going to sign. Apparently, the reports are that Kyrie Irving is going to sign with them later today or early tomorrow out there.
Not L.A.?
Not L.A. It's about Kyrie here in New York playing with Brooklyn.
And it's good for the league to have, the small markets do well because you need those small market teams. You have Giannis Antetokounmpo, a young global star playing in Milwaukee, small market. Remember,
Greek Nigerian.
Exactly.
Global, right? Won the MVP. Nigerian who immigrated out of Nigeria.
His parents
to live
to
in
Greece.
For a better life, and now is the MVP of the NBA.
Absolutely.
So it is so global, the sport right now.
Sounds
Global.
good.
Yeah.
And the last thought here for us today, unless someone else. No, I'm not throwing it out to anyone else. Brother Larry, do you have something coming up that's taking place, or was that yesterday? Because I saw something out there on Facebook. Yes. Did it happen yesterday? Or?
We had the reparations protest.
Okay.
That was last week. There was
something out there that just continued to repeat. As of yesterday, I received something from you.
Okay. What's coming up is the 52nd commemoration of the Newark Rebellion of 1967. That's July 12th. So that's like 12 days from now. So we want everybody to come out. That's July 12th, 4:30. At the Rebellion Monument. There's actually a little monument to the rebellion in Newark with the names of all the people that died. That it's like the street address is like 275 Springfield Avenue. It's at the intersection of Belmont Avenue and 15th Avenue. But we want everybody to come out for that. And people should observe these rebellion commemorations in all their cities. There were over 1,000 uprisings in the United States just between 1960 and 1972. That we used to have a saying, right around the cornerism. We actually thought the revolution was around the corner, because if you had an awareness of all these rebellions, because 2 weeks after Newark was Detroit, which was probably the most catastrophic in terms of scale. But New York City had 2 rebellions, I think, in the 60s.
I think it'll make a great book for students, the history of rebellions.
Or a documentary or something.
Or a documentary.
Yeah.
Once you come out of retirement.
Exactly.
Yes,
You know,
Sammy.
Documentary.
and
Come on,
what
Akil.
was interesting, you know, and tying in sports, what was interesting with the, you know, the rebellion in Detroit, it's the same year that the Tigers won the World Series. And so they had called on a lot of the athletes to try to help and, you know, calm down the black community. So
And this is why you're the sports brothers and the history room. There you go.
Well,
And the intersectionality.
intersectionality, yeah.
exactly. Well, this has been a kind of a quiet show today. We had to reach over, Bobby. You have to reach over, but this has been a very spirited show this week, and we thank you all out there for continuing to view us and continue to share us out there.
And next week?
Next week we will be off for the 4th of July holiday, so they got a long weekend, and a lot of people deserve it. A lot of people work behind the scenes that really work hard for the radio station. So with that,
Tazo's smiling.
You see Tazo
there you go. He looks forward
So
to it.
as the one and only Bob Slade would say, get your mind right
Yes.
and keep a good thought.
And have a great Sunday, everybody. God bless.
Yes, God bless you.